Welcome back to the broadcast. As you know, churches across the United States are opening. Others are proceeding with caution, and others are being prevented from opening altogether. Our Mark Martin spoke with conservative talk radio host TODD STARNES about the battles some churches are still facing for their right to worship together.
Todd, bring us up to speed where things stand across the nation with church reopenings.
Well, it's good news. We're starting to see church houses across the country that are reopening, and some are being very creative about it. For example, Bellevue Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, they actually have multiple worship services. They block off every other row so you can practice social distancing, and they even have an exclusive service. You know how a lot of churches they have the praise band service, and then they have the choir service. Well, at Bellevue Baptist Church, they have the mask service. So it's a service. Everybody in that building has to wear a face mask. So when they go to church. So churches by and large are getting very creative. They're doing a terrific job of reopening the churches and getting people back in those pews.
You've been reporting on cases in places like Chicago, with the city still cracking down on churches. Elaborate on that.
Well, we're starting to see some of those crackdowns loosen up just a little bit. There were two major lawsuits, and unfortunately, there was this one in Chicago with two churches that were fined. They were the pastors were literally fined for holding worship services. And then in California, you had a crackdown there where people were not allowed to congregate in groups larger than, I believe, 10 or 25 people. And sadly for the churches and sadly for religious liberty, the courts rejected those cases. More disturbing, in the California case, you had Chief Justice John Roberts siding with the liberal justices in cracking down and affirming the church crackdown in California. So while churches are beginning to reopen and get back to the business at hand, long term, we're going to have a very, very difficult discussion on where religious liberty stands here in the United States of America.
You talked with a constitutional law expert recently about the recent Supreme Court ruling to keep a California church closed and the implications of that ruling. You touched on that. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, this case, the South Bay Pentecostal Church, and they wanted the right to hold worship services. I mean, again, people are congregating on the beach. In recent days, we've seen tens of thousands of people marching in the streets. And so a lot of Christians are saying, well, wait a second, if they can do all that, why can't we go into the church house and pray and worship and experience corporate worship? So this lawsuit went to the Supreme Court, all the way to the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Roberts sided with the justices, the liberal justices, and said, hey, look, it was a reasonable thing for the governor to do. Other groups, for example, were allowed were also banned. And so the Chief Justice, in a shocking decision, voted against the churches.
With all this going on, could constitutional rights like freedom of religion be at risk in America?
Well, I have no doubt this is one of the more concerning things of this coronavirus, this global pandemic, is that religious liberty was one of the first things to be set aside, and they did so in the name of public safety. What I find very interesting is when you compare how the mainstream media reacted to these churches. I mean, they were publicly shaming the churches and the pastors, saying that anybody who went to the church was going to get coronavirus. And yet these same media outlets are now celebrating the tens of thousands of people who are engaged in these nationwide protests and who, in fact, are not engaging in social distancing and other things. Look, I think there's a lesson here for all of us. You know, by and large, I think most churches in America understood that, you know what, in the early days, we didn't know what this thing was. Why not be prudent? And there were some churches out there that said, you know what, we're not going to be prudent. The government's not going to tell us what to do. And there were big problems in those churches because a lot of people got sick. So I think we need to understand that, yes, we need to stand up for religious liberty, but we also need to understand that there's a good, healthy dose of common sense here as we determine when it's appropriate to get back to the church house.
All right, TODD STARNES, thank you for your insights and time, sir.
Thank you.